Hello guys, welcome to another video, and this one I wanted to do a bit of discussion on the Repulsion skill, which is a brand new curse ability that's been brought into the game in this patch. It's part of the kind of assortment of Runic Ward skills, and this one is being used a lot already. A lot of people have recognised that this is a really good skill, but I wanted to do a bit of discussion on the mechanics of this skill because it's actually really quite interesting the way how it interacts with some of your weapon choices that you can make there. And first, let's just discuss exactly what this skill is. So, this is a curse skill. It would work like normal if you actually were to use it normally, which is it will just curse an area. After a short delay, the targets within that area will be cursed, and they'll basically have fragility applied to them. And how that works is there's this kind of attack portion of the skill, and if any of the cursed targets actually get hit by anything, they will trigger this repulsion wave attack, and that will deal damage in an area. It will deal damage to the target and in an area around them. And the fragility there plays into the stun build-up. There's also some knockback component there as well with this. But this is actually a really interesting ability from the perspective of the interaction right here of how damage is actually calculated for this attack. Because it says here, deals physical attack damage in an area around the cursed target that is not based on your weapon's damage. And instead of that, it has a base physical damage here. This is kind of derived from the gem level. This one right here is currently level 21. So this kind of scales like a spell would, right? You're gaining the flat damage based on gem levels, but it is an attack. However, it does not use your weapon's damage. Now, the interesting thing about this skill is that whilst you could kind of use it normally, it does have a 124 ward cost at level 21, that is quite a lot. And how people have been using this and getting around that is by using it socketed into Blasphemy, which is basically this persistent buff. It does reserve 60 spirit per socketed curse, so you are going to be using up a lot of spirit to actually make use of this. But by doing that, you'll be able to bypass the ward cost, because the actual triggered attack hit there of the Repulsion Wave, it doesn't have any ward cost at all, unlike some of the other things that come with like Runic Ward skills where they actually have a ward cost per ability being triggered. This one has 0 ward cost on the Repulsion Wave, which makes it have incredible synergy with Blasphemy. Now let's get back to that weapon damage part there. The attack hit deals physical attack damage not based on your weapon's damage. Now here's the interesting thing. What that means is that, for example, looking at this Brutus Lead Sprinkler here, this has 79 to 117 physical damage. That is the base inherent weapon damage right there, and that is the part of the damage that's not being added to this attack. So you won't benefit from the inherent weapon damage on a weapon. However, you will benefit from any added attack damage coming from any sources at all. So the most basic example of that would be rings or gloves with added attack damage. For example, added lightning damage to attacks, or added physical damage, or added fire damage to attacks. All of those things will add their damage to the repulsion attack. But the inherent weapon damage that's listed here on any weapon that you have equipped will not be added directly to the repulsion attack hit. However, there's some ways to kind of get around this and add a huge amount of damage. One of those, for example, is the build that I've been using, which is the Brutus Lead Sprinkler kind of tornado build there, along with the Acolyte of Chaiula with the new Archon skill. However, part of that build is that I've been using Repulsion with Blasphemy, and the reason for that is that you actually gain the added attack damage here, which is 5 to 10 added attack fire damage per 25 strength. That is not an inherent modifier to the weapon, but it's a global added attack damage modifier. That means that it stacks when you're using 2 of these weapons, and that is added globally to any attack that you deal. So if we actually look over here on the Repulsion Wave, you can see that huge amount of fire damage being added right here, and if I actually take one of the weapons off, so right now we're about 1400 to 2800 there, if we take one off, you can see that, the damage there is being halved, or approximately halved. So this is actually adding all of that damage to the repulsion attack hit, and that is one way that you can gain a huge amount of flat damage to each of those hits. So that makes Brutus Lead Sprinkler an interesting option there for attack hits. Another thing that happens with Brutus Lead Sprinkler that I can show right here is that the repulsion hit will actually trigger the Molten Shower. So the repulsion hit does count as a weapon attack. And for example, I do have thorns on my belt here so that whenever targets actually get hit, you can see that it's actually spawning the Molten Shower there every time I actually do get hit. and that is the repulsion hit counting as a hit with Brutus Lead Sprinkler. So this is an interesting weapon that you can use with repulsion. It's really quite a strong combo there, but I want to focus in on a few others there because there are some interesting mechanics you can make use of where some modifiers will actually apply to the repulsion hit and others won't apply at all. So the first one I want to look at there is the Olrovasara unique mace, which is a Kalguran unique mace. And it has the modifier there on hitting an enemy gains maximum added lightning damage equal to the enemy's power for 20 seconds, up to a total of 500. Now the interesting thing about that modifier is that that will actually get added to repulsion. So you actually get the flat lightning damage being added to repulsion, and that will be triggered by repulsion hits themselves as well. So you don't actually have to go out of your way to make hits with this mace to then get it added to repulsion. You can just have a setup where you automatically trigger repulsion. For example, you could be doing like a living lightning setup, which a lot of people have been doing, where you have your minions actually trigger the repulsion hits. That will then hit the monsters, which will add lightning damage, and you'll get this kind of continuous feed back into, dealing lightning damage, spawning more living lightning minions, and just keeping the damage there all the time. So I can actually show you that right here. If I pull up the skill panel, and I pull up the damage here, you'll actually be able to see that being added. So right now I have just physical damage and chaos damage. The chaos is coming there from my Chiuda flames. But if we just find some monsters here to actually get hit by so we can trigger the repulsion, you'll begin to see that I can start getting lightning damage added to my attacks there. So here it is, the lightning damage gets added, and this is based, of course, on the monster power, every hit that comes in there. And it will last, each hit will actually last for about 20 seconds there, and then we can actually keep that damage. And obviously, in a mapping environment, once you're hitting lots of rares and things like that, you're going to be able to cap out at the maximum damage there fairly easily. And this one can be corrupted up. It can go up to like 600 plus damage on the top end. And that means that, let's say you have a fully corrupted weapon and you're able to get an average of 300 added lightning damage to attacks. Well, if we take a look at the repulsion skill right here, on a level 21 skill for repulsion, the repulsion wave is dealing 137 to 206 base physical damage. So you'll be able to get even more flat added damage just from this weapon. Like using this weapon and getting that added damage is even more than the gem itself on the base damage. And you get that added on top. So this is actually quite an interesting weapon that you could use there. Next up we have the Splinter of Lorrata, which has two modifiers there. The first says any number of poisons from this weapon can affect a target at the same time. And the second says always poison on hit with this weapon. Now here's the interesting thing there. One of these applies and the other doesn't. So always poison on hit with this weapon does not apply to the repulsion attack hit. That doesn't get carried over, but the any number of poisons from this weapon can affect a target at the same time. That one does actually get pulled over. Well, that means that you are going to have to scale poison chance for repulsion yourself, but you can get a bunch of like global poison chance from the passive tree. You can use things like poison support, for example. So if I put poison support in here, you're going to be able to see that when I find some enemies here, they will be stacking up poisons. So here we go. Let's just stack up these monsters a little bit. And there you go. You can see like 4 or 5 poisons on those. So this will actually allow you to use that any number of poisons modifier on the repulsion hit. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is because the Splinter of Lorrata is kind of balanced around the fact that it has no base damage at all. 8 to 15 damage. I believe you can get a Rune Forged version, which gets you up to around 60 or 70 base damage on the weapon, which is still incredibly low. And the repulsion hit has a much larger flat physical damage. So 137 to 206 on a level 21 gem. You can push that up quite a bit more with gem levels. For example, there is the Vow Unique that I forget the name of, but that one actually got changed in this patch to instead grant Curse gem levels, so that one can gain up to 5 Curse gem levels, so you could scale flat damage that way. Next up we have Tangletongue, which has been a really popular spear in the past. And the way this works is your critical hit chance is basically rolled twice, and if you succeed on either of those critical hit rolls, the hit will be a critical hit, and it will, of course, benefit from your critical damage bonus. But if you crit on both rolls, it will apply your critical damage bonus twice, so it's a much more powerful hit there that deals way more damage. And that is a very powerful spear, but to make good use of this spear, you kind of need a lot of added damage from somewhere, because it, once again, has low base damage. And the way this works with the repulsion skill is that The Repulsion skill itself has its own critical hit chance. So you can see right there it has a 6% base crit. You can actually see that on the skill here. The 6% base crit is coming from the skill itself. It will not use your weapon's critical hit chance. Now that can be beneficial. For example, you could use a mace that has 5% base crit and you'd have a little bit of extra base crit there. But most of the time, this is probably going to be a bit of a downside. And in this case, it is a bit of a downside because, of course, you would have wanted to use the Tangletongue base crit there, which has a bunch of added base crit. But you will inherit the Bifurcate's critical hit modifier, and that's the most important part here. So if you're actually scaling up crit along with Repulsion, you can use Tangletongue, and it will actually roll your critical hit chance twice. And you can actually see right here, you do have the base critical hit chance of 6%, which is inherited from Repulsion, but you are going to be able to roll your critical hit chance twice, and that way you can actually scale up your crit bonus. In this build, I don't have any crit scaling or crit bonus at all, that's why it looks kind of mediocre there, but you could definitely make use of this with Repulsion. Now, I did do a bunch of testing with a lot of different weapons, so I will mention some others there. The first is Nebuloch, which is a mace there that has the modifier attacks, consume, and endurance charge to critically hit. And this does work with Repulsion, so you can consume an endurance charge to cause a Repulsion attack hit to be a critical hit. But for that to be a thing, kind of whilst mapping and stuff like that, you probably want to have a lot of endurance charge generation, because it will consume an endurance charge for every single attack hit to cause it to crit, because every single hit on each monster is an individual attack hit. So that's how it works. But that can be something that's really quite powerful, because as I just mentioned, the Repulsion skill has its own base damage, right? And Nebuloch isn't a very good base damage weapon, so you can use this base damage, you can use added damage, and then what you can do is spend an endurance charge to bypass the low base crit of this skill of 6% to guarantee the crit. That means that you can then just go straight to scaling critical damage bonus rather than scaling critical hit chance, and you can find other ways to gain added damage to the Repulsion hit. One good way, for example, is the Bursting Decay Ring. That one adds flat physical damage to your attacks based on your maximum life. You'll have to get past the whole loss of life over time. But that's going to be it for this video. I just wanted to do a bit of discussion on Repulsion, because I think it's actually a really interesting skill with those mechanics where it kind of inherits some things from your weapon and it ignores some other things. This one is a big winner because it can be used on a lot of builds. It doesn't really need a high Runic Ward investment. In fact, it doesn't need any, really, because you just use it with Blasphemy. I'm not sure if this is going to stay in the game in the long term. I could see them kind of changing this so that you still have to spend Runic Ward on the Repulsion wave hits. But at least in the current patch, this is how it works right now. So if you want to make a build around this, definitely consider doing it in this patch. And there's some interesting options that you could do it with. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.